Well, hello, everybody. Hello, my achievers. My name is Nicole Coustier. I am the founder of Aurelian Coaching, and you are in the third webinar in a series about planning and execution using my D.A.R.T method for deliberate planning. So this is the third webinar. This is the meat of all of it. Okay, so if you've listened to the previous webinars, you know that the first step before you set any goals and before you do any of the things is to establish what? Your desired condition. What do you ultimately want to happen? What's the purpose of all of this? What is your desired outcome? What is the condition of your career or your marriage or your parenting life? What is that desired condition that you ultimately want to achieve? You've got to start there. Otherwise, all the goals you set, they're aimless, right? They have to go towards supporting something. So you got to do that first. Then the second part of the deliberate planning method is that acronym D.A.R.T. So D.A.R.T stands for decision, authority, rationale, and timeline. And the crux of this method is that not only are you making decisions, not only are you setting goals, but you can articulate why. Why on earth is that decision going to get you closer to that purpose? Why is that decision going to support that desired condition that you're trying to achieve? You have to be able to articulate that. So that was the second webinar, was going through examples of applying that acronym to decision making. Now we get to what I probably coach 90% of my people on when we're going through this method. You know, they think, can they set a purpose, a desired condition? Yeah, they can do that. You know, write down the decisions and who has the authority to execute on those, and why is that decision going to get me closer to ultimately what I want, and what's the timeline? Yeah, they can do that. And now we get to the part of, well, what are all the things that are holding you back? Well, now it gets a little bit, this is where people have trouble, right? Because what planning and execution really is, it's actually two sides of the same coin. On the one side, you have what you're going to do, the decisions that you're going to make, the SMART goals that you have. These are the things that you're going to do. But on the other side, and this is what people don't always think about, is the resources that are available to you to actually execute on all of that stuff. Do you have the resources? Are the resources available in the amount that you need, at the frequency that you need? And what constitutes a resource? You know, a lot of people think about setting goals in career, or you know, if they're working in initiatives on the job, they think in terms of money and time. Of course, those are obvious resources that you need to make sure that you have in order to execute on what you want to accomplish. Yeah, but what about other things? What about the resource of confidence? Don't you need to have a certain level of confidence in order to execute on those goals, especially if they are pushing the envelope? Do you need support from friends and family and coworkers in order to be successful? Have you thought about that? Or is the idea that you're just going to do 100% of it on your own? If you can do 100% of it on your own, fantastic, go do it. But if at some point you might need support from a spouse, what kind of support? Do you have that support in the way that you need it, in the amount that you need it? Might warrant a conversation, right? So planning and execution are both of these things, not just what you're going to do when, but also the available resources. Do you have what you need in order to do those things? And so that's why a lot of this stuff comes up in the third step of the deliberate planning method that I created. And I call them the WhyNots, right? So if you have your purpose set, beautiful. If you've gone through the D.A.R.T, acronym and set up all these decisions and these goals, and you know why they're going to get you closer, fantastic. Now is the time to brainstorm what are all the things that are going to get in your way, all the things that are going to get in your way, or all the things that you don't have in order to execute the way you need to and in the timeline that you set for yourself. I call these the WhyNots, okay? And what I'm going to review in this third webinar is my WhyNot Matrix. Okay, so once you identify all the things that might thwart you in your mission, what do you do with those things? How do you think about those potential problems? How do you resolve them? How do you get those why nots out of the way before you undertake your journey? Create a smooth path for yourself. That's going to be easier than dealing with problems as they come up that you hadn't thought about, you hadn't anticipated. Okay, so that is the good, valuable, hard work that we're doing today, that I'm going to teach you about today. Okay, so one thing that a lot of business leaders talk about, and there are books written on this, is this concept of your why. Make sure you keep your ultimate why, your purpose, really close. If you can do that, you are on your way to accomplishing all the things. Here's the problem with that, right? You can have your strong why. Maybe your why is providing for your family, right? Making sure your kids can get into the college that they want to go to, whatever it might be, right? These are very noble reasons for doing what you want to do. And yet, we still might not meet our goals. Okay, so there's something happening there. There's a gap. And no matter how noble your why is, you can keep that why close and you can have a vision board, and you can do all these things, but there's something happening that results in that gap. Okay, and it is often these why nots, these barriers to your achieving your goals, that sometimes they're stronger. Your why nots might be stronger than your whys, right? Your why nots might be stronger than your whys, which is why it's so important to surface all those why nots. Make sure you know what is in your path and what might thwart you. Now, these might be external things. True. COVID is a big, fat, external why not for a lot of things, right? This is why a lot of goals have been sidetracked, right? But part of this, and for so many achievers and so many leaders, a lot of the why nots might be internal. Mindset barriers, emotional barriers that, you know what, we don't like to think about because we're achievers, we're problem solvers. We can apply enough willpower to get it done, which is fantastic until it doesn't work that way, until you hit a brick wall somewhere along the line, right? Now, for achievers, you might not hit that wall until later on, but it happens with everybody. It happens with everybody. And so that's why this third step is so important. What it involves is brainstorming all of the why nots that are in your way, right? So if you have a purpose and a desired condition that you're working toward, and you go through the D.A.R.T steps to make all these really sound decisions, and you know why those decisions make sense. And if you can't articulate why those decisions will get you closer to your purpose, to fulfilling your purpose, well, then you know to drop them, right? Don't allocate a bunch of resources to a decision or an activity that doesn't actually get you closer to your desired condition. Just drop it. Yeah. And so when you have that beautiful plan, now you need to look in the mirror and be honest with yourself about what are the external and internal factors that are going to be holding you back. And this is hard because sometimes you don't feel safe admitting those things, right? As an achiever, as an accomplished person, you have an identity for getting things done, for solving problems. And so if some of this feels really awkward, yeah, that's probably normal for a lot of achievers. If some of the things that you need to admit to yourself, feels uncomfortable or even distasteful, write it down. Write it down. Be honest with yourself, because you know what? It's better to surface those things now, look at yourself in the mirror and resolve it, fix it now, rather than just going full speed ahead. And at the end of the year, kind of scratching your head and going, well, I tried my best and we didn't get there. And it being a complete mystery why it didn't happen. Or even worse, let's not do this, blaming a lot of other things for why you didn't get it done. Yeah, don't be that person. Don't be that person. Okay. So do this hard work now. Take out a piece of paper and just write down all the things. Do you have issues with conflict? Are you conflict averse? You can't be conflict averse if you have to do this thing. Well, you got to write that down. Okay. If you feel like you don't have enough self-confidence, if you feel like you don't have enough experience, or you're intimidated by other people's expertise, and this is going to hold you back in moving forward, write it down. You have to write those things down. What is going to prevent you from doing the things? All the things. Okay. Let's make sure that all those why nots are not going to be stronger than your why, that they're not going to be stronger than your purpose. Because if they are, when push comes to shove and you have to actually execute, all those why nots are going to outstrip any willpower you have doing all the things, right? So let's surface those now. Okay. If you are having trouble accessing your why nots, see if you can brainstorm on this question. If you know what your purpose is, that desired condition, and you've set goals in the past and those goals have not been met, or whatever it might be, I want you to ask yourself, why aren't you already there? Why aren't you already there? And again, just open brainstorming, right? There's a tendency, and this is normal, there's a tendency to be really defensive and say, well, you know, my boss was this, or the economy this, and like all these other things, all these other factors are why I didn't get it done, or I have not achieved it to date, or I haven't done the things in the timelines that I had wanted to. That's fine. You can write all those things down, okay? But see if you can find also corresponding internal why nots for why you're not already there. Okay. So these why nots are the resource limitations, right? So when we're thinking about executing on something, we have our plan. Think of the why nots as the way to surface all the resource limitations, real or perceived. It doesn't matter because even if it's perceived, you're still not acting. So just don't worry about filtering and saying, well, no, that's not really true. And I know I just need to work on that mindset. No, write it down, even if it's a perceived limitation in resources, it's a perceived why not, write it down. Okay. And once you have that list, you got to do something with each of those why nots. And this is where the WhyNot matrix comes into play. Okay, it's a 2x2 matrix. And for each of your why nots, it will go in one of 4 boxes. So what are these boxes? Okay. On one axis, you have whether the why not or the resource limitation is an external factor or an internal one. Okay. That's one side of the matrix. The other side of the matrix is so fascinating. I can't wait to share examples of this because it's going to blow your mind. The other side of the matrix is whether you're willing to accept that limitation or whether you're unwilling to accept the limitation. Willing or unwilling? Okay. What this means is that for any particular why not, any particular barrier you might have, where it goes in this matrix might be different for somebody else who has that same resource limitation. Okay, so in each of these, but depending on where you put your why not, you're going to address it in different ways. So for example, if it's an external factor that you are willing to accept, right? One strategy that you could do is put together a workaround, right? Because you can't control the other person. You can't control their behavior. You may not be able to control your circumstance. And it's not unacceptable. So you're willing to accept it, but you still want to improve the situation so that you can meet your goals. We'll create a workaround. Okay, I'm going to give examples of these. Okay, if you are willing to accept any of the internal barriers that you have, self-confidence issues, conflict aversion, any of those things, if you recognize that there are internal limitations, but you're just willing to accept them, what happens there? You just have to work on accepting it. If it's internal and you're not going to do anything about it, you're accepting the internal limitations that you have, then the situations just continue to be the way it is. Just is. That's it. Okay. Now, what happens if you're unwilling to accept? Which means that, you recognize these limitations and you want to do something about it. Okay. If it's external and it's unacceptable, you create a boundary. Now, I've had videos on how to set boundaries, and I'm going to review them very briefly, but I encourage you to look at some of my other videos on the YouTube channel and then at the website aureliancoaching.com, because setting a boundary is a very, very specific thing. And it requires 4 steps. And if you aren't prepared to do all 4 steps, you know what? You're not creating a boundary. Okay. So when I say create a boundary here, you have an external circumstance that you are absolutely unwilling to accept. You create a boundary to protect yourself, to protect your family, to protect your job, whatever it is. This is serious stuff. Okay. Now, if it's if you are unwilling to accept some of the internal limitations, right? That's where you have to do a lot of mental and emotional work to resolve those things. That's a lot of times this is where coaching occurs, right? But this is the hard work. This is mindset stuff. Okay. And, when I say coaching, that means with mentors, with colleagues, with friends, with your spouse, or with a therapist, with a life coach, with a business coach, any of those things, right? But basically you need, or self-coaching. Self-coaching is also something that you can do once you learn the techniques and you can apply it to yourself. But this is something that if you are unwilling to accept some of the internal limitations that you have that are either mental or emotional, okay, now that's some internal work that you need to do. Okay, this is the WhyNot Matrix. Okay, I'm going to give you an example because examples help so much. This is an example from like years ago, and it's one that I often use because it's fairly simple. So it's easy to see where in the matrix these things go. Now, remember that 2 people can have the same why not, but put it in different boxes. And therefore, they will address those why nots in fundamentally different ways. Okay. All right, here we go. I had a client a couple years, this wasn't a client, this was somebody that I mentored, somebody that I managed, whose desired condition was to just always find job satisfaction. She was somebody who was deciding, hadn't really decided on ultimately her career path, but she knew that one condition of her life was she wanted to have high job satisfaction. Okay. So she went through the D.A.R.T method, which involved lots of different decisions on her part to kind of find herself in a job situation that could optimize the chances, maximize the chances that she would have good job satisfaction. But then when we got to step 3 of the model, all the why nots, she came up with some very interesting things. And a lot of these why nots were based on her experience to date of, well, what didn't she like on jobs so far? And she came up with a couple of different things. And because her reasons went in certain boxes, I've actually come up with other why nots in this same case study that could kind of fill out the matrix so you could see the application in each box. Okay, so one of the things that she said, she was extremely smart and accomplished for being so young. And she said one thing that kind of she felt like it dragged her down was helping other people. So, when she saw a problem and she knew the answer to the problem, instead of just focusing on her work, she would go work with the other person. And she was like, I know how to solve that. Here, I can help you, right? So what it did was it was distracting her from her duties and responsibilities and executing on all the things that she had responsibilities for. And because she was taking time away from that stuff, she was stressed out. She was stressed out that she wasn't accomplishing things. And this was a totally unnecessary level of stress, right? And so to her, the question of, was it internal or external? This was very astute of her. She said, well, actually, it's internal. I mean, people may ask her for help, but she can say no. And she wasn't saying no. And a lot of times people weren't even asking, but she saw that they were experiencing some challenges and she stopped whatever she was doing. She was making the choice to go do the thing. Okay. So she recognized it was internal. And now the question is, are you willing to accept that about yourself or unwilling? And other people might choose other things, but she said, you know what? I am totally willing to accept that about myself. I think it's fine that I help people. I think that's part of my professional identity. That is something that I don't want to lose. And it's something that's probably going to help me in the future. And so she was here. And what happens when you recognize that that is something that is going to get in your way of accomplishing your goals, right? But that you're willing to accept it. She did the work, she let it go. It was no longer stressful because she was proactively making the decision. You know what? This is who I am. I help. And it's good. And so a lot of the stress kind of fell away and she was in a better position to do some problem solving about how to accommodate both things. Okay. All right. Another thing that she said is that as a member of mid-level staff, she was just accept any meeting that was coming into the calendar, her calendar, any meeting request, she was just accepting it. Yes. Right. So her calendar was crazy popular. Now, if a lot of my achievers have been in middle management before, or they are now, and wow, middle management is that it's such a tricky place to be because you are moving on from some of the tactical stuff, but you aren't in senior leadership yet. And so you can't necessarily dictate. You don't necessarily feel comfortable dictating how everything needs to be. And so you're in this awkward area where you feel like you have to do all the things. So yeah, she was just accepting meetings left and right. And what it was doing was it was distracting and cramping her efforts in being productive during the day. Okay, so internal or external? The way she labeled it was internal, again, because she was just blindly accepting. And but she said, I'm not willing to accept that because I can't be double and triple booked. I can't actually function as a manager if I'm double booked. booked and triple booked sometimes. So unwilling, right? So the question is, if it's an internal, it's about her own decision making, right? Accepting all the meetings and never questioning anything. But she recognized this is unacceptable. I can't continue. This is not sustainable. So she's unwilling to accept that going forward if she wants to meet her goals. She's here, right? She needed coaching on this. Internal. Why did she feel the need to say yes all the time? Okay, you need to work through that. She had issues saying no, right? This was slightly different than going and helping people, because so the difference there was she was inserting herself in situations, right? Here, people are coming to her. Okay, so it was internal and she was unwilling to accept it. So now she needed to work on, why was she conflict averse? Why was she not asking questions? Why was she uncomfortable saying no to other people when she was already booked? You know, all of that stuff. And we worked through that and it was very good. And it helped her for the rest of the year. This became a non-issue and she was able to meet her goals because she resolved that. She surfaced it and she resolved it. Okay. This is an example from another person who was working in a cramped workspace. So one of her WhyNots for not accomplishing her goals on the job was she worked in such a noisy area. And you know what? There were so many distractions. And she just felt like, I can't work here. I can't work here. It's a very noisy area, but she didn't have the option to have a private office. She's in cubicle land. So, the noise of the people are on other calls. Like, what can she do? Okay, so that was an external circumstance. She couldn't actually control where she was sitting in the office, and the office layout was such that people were in close quarters. And so it was noisy. That's external. She did not have any control over that. And the question is, are you willing to accept it or are you unwilling to accept it? Well, she didn't want to lose her job. She didn't want to quit, right? So she has to accept it, right? So she's here. There's an external factor that she's willing to accept, but maybe there's a workaround. So she got noise canceling headphones. She was able to put something up as a signal. They had the cubicle walls that were only about this tall. And so she put a little, I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was a toy or some sort of bright thing on the ledge of her cubicle to signal to other people that she's trying to do some deep work. So if she wasn't expecting that everybody should just quiet down for her, but it was a visual cue to other people to, if they could keep it down, that they would, or if they wanted to have sidebar conversations, that they would take it into the break room, for example, so that she could do some work in a little bit of a quieter space. That's a great workaround. There's a couple of workarounds there. Okay. Another example, just because I want to make sure to tick off all the boxes, is this concept of micromanaging. I've had people tell me that their bosses micromanage. And because the bosses are more focused on the employees' work than their own work, the bosses get stressed out, right? And they might not do as much of the work that they need to do. And then they're under the gun and they're under pressure. And then it's just this vicious cycle, right? So I've had people tell me that, gosh, like not just entry-level people or interns or middle managers, but I've had like head of global marketing tell me about their, VPs micromanaging them. So this is something that's really interesting. in that some of my clients, when they come across this situation, are in the boundary box. So this is an external factor. They cannot control their boss's behavior. You can't control another person. Forget it. I mean, we know that intellectually, and yet we still kind of hope that we can influence other people's decisions. Yeah, that doesn't happen. Okay. You can't control other people, but you are unwilling to accept this external factor. So you create a boundary. That is the fourth box in the WhyNot 2x2 matrix. And what does it mean to create a boundary? Okay. Again, check out other videos, but I'm going to recap. Number one, you have to decide that there is a boundary violation and how you are being violated. And it needs to be a serious thing. It needs to be some risk to your health and well-being, which sounds pretty dramatic, but you know what? It is. It is. It needs to be something where your health and well-being is at risk, your job and livelihood is at risk. It needs to be that level of threat. So that's number one. You have to decide what the boundary is. When that person does X, it represents a threat to my health and well-being, whether it's mental, emotional, financial, whatever it is. When that person does X, it is a threat to me in this way. Okay? So you have to decide what that is. That's a very bold statement. And if it makes you uncomfortable, you know what? You're probably not here. You're probably not unwilling. You're probably up here. Okay. Number two in a boundary, once you decide what the boundary is you have to actually communicate it to the person. There's none of this stuff where you're setting boundaries in your own head and the other person doesn't even know that what they're doing is a boundary violation to you. That does not count, my friend. No. Okay. So once you decide what the boundary is, you actually have to tell the other person. Ooh, if that makes you uncomfortable, guess what? You're probably not here. You're probably up here. Okay. The third thing that you have to do is you have to decide what you are going to do to protect yourself if that person, now that they know it's a boundary for you, if that person violates it in the future. You have to decide, what are you going to do to protect yourself? So if your boss micromanages and you decide, you know what, I need to set a boundary here, you decide if you continue, because you have to communicate it, if you continue to micromanage me in this way, I'm going to leave the department. I'm going to leave. Right? Or there might be some other action that you do that is not as drastic as leaving. But there has to be something that you do to protect yourself, not to change their behavior, not as a threat or some sort of manipulation because you think secretly you hope you might be able to convince them to change. No, boundaries are all about you. Okay, you can't control other people. So that's number three. You have to decide, what are you going to do, not to change them, but to protect yourself. And if you're unwilling to take a drastic measure to protect yourself, guess what? You're probably not here. You're probably up there. Okay. And then the fourth thing that you have to do with a boundary, once you decide what the boundary is, once you communicate to the other party, and once you decide what you are going to do as a result to protect yourself, the fourth thing is you have to do it. You have to do the thing that you said you're going to do. You can't decide on a boundary communicate it to the other person, determine what you're going to do to protect yourself, and then not do it. That just makes you a liar. Empty threats. Don't be that person. Okay. So those are the 4 factors in being in this box. If you're not in this box, then you need to do some brainstorming around some workarounds or some compromises, but you got to get those why not. You have to surface. See, all of this work, if you figure out all of your why nots, what boxes they go in, and what to do in advance, you will never miss another goal for the rest of your life. You will never miss another goal for the rest of your life. This is the work. This is the good, productive, hard, but extremely important and critical work to getting everything you want. All right, guys, there is step 3 of the D.A.R.T method. I told you it was going to be a doozy. I told you this is 90% of what I coach people on, but it's so good. It's so good. So there's one more webinar in this series, and that's going to be next week. And in that one, we're going to talk about the 4th step of the D.A.R.T deliberate planning model for planning and execution. And that's going to be how to use your calendar. Most people use their calendar wrong. Most people use their calendar to tell themselves what they're going to do. This sounds weird, but you know what? That's not the best way to use a calendar. And so join us for next week. We are going to revisit the calendar, and I'll teach you how to use it the right way to make sure that you can execute on everything that you need to execute on. Okay, everybody, it was my pleasure. Go to aureliancoaching.com for more information. Schedule a consult with me if you'd like to talk about this stuff a little bit more and how to apply it. I'd love to be able to talk with you and your teams. Okay, guys, talk to you next week. Bye.